This video is going to cover the first noble truth of Buddhism, or dukkha, and touch on a little bit the second noble truth, the arising or the source of dukkha. So you've already done the reading by Rahula and the reading questions and the quiz, so you know that dukkha actually has several definitions, and so often it's better just to leave the term untranslated, except of course in a quiz or an exam where I'm asking you to explain it. The most common definition of dukkha, and the one that Rahula uses the most, is suffering. This is a characterization of human life. Human life is characterized by suffering. As human beings, we suffer, we feel pain, we feel grief. There's sort of more deep philosophical definitions of dukkha that express the nature of reality itself, or the nature of human life itself. Human life is impermanent. Our bodies eventually will die and decompose. Every experience that we have is fleeting. Human life is imperfect. Even right now, as I try to create this online lecture, I am plagued by the lighting in this office and the problem with glares and shadows and things like that. So human life is just imperfect. Insubstantial or empty. This is connected to the idea of no self in Buddhism, that there is no everlasting eternal self or soul. And finally, a definition that I really like is dissatisfactory. I like this definition because it's connected to the image of the wheel, an image that we'll talk about a lot when we get into our next unit on Taoism. But the wheel is composed of two main parts. The part that is material, or the spokes, usually made of metal or wood, and then the empty center of the wheel, or the hub. The hub is a necessary part of the wheel because that's where the axle gets placed. The axle is what connects the wheel to the cart or the car or whatever it is that it's being connected to. Now, if the axle fits the hub perfectly, then the ride is very smooth. However, if the axle doesn't fit the wheel perfectly, then the ride is bumpy. And human life is like that. The fit of the axle and the hub is imperfect, and therefore the ride is just a little bumpy all the time. Our bodies hurt. We are in situations that we don't enjoy. We lose people we care about. The ride is just a little bit bumpy. One of my teachers, Mark Nunberg, put it this way over and over again: being a human is hard. It's just hard. It's just difficult. And that is dukkha, just a description of human life itself. So dukkha is divided into three aspects in the reading, but I told you just to focus on the first two because the third would be covered in what is called the five aggregates. I call them two aspects rather than two types of dukkha because they're not really two types. They're two aspects because they're two ways of viewing dukkha, two ways of seeing the same experience. So the first aspect is just ordinary dukkha. Your ordinary, run-of-the-mill, being a human being, dukkha. We are all born, we all age, we get sick, we die. It's just part of the human condition. On top of that, we also find ourselves in situations or around people that we don't like or that cause us discomfort. This can be being around a person that you really don't like and the difficulty of that. It can be as simple as being in the elevator. Often I find that in a crowded elevator at KSU, people don't want to be there, even though it's only a couple minutes. And so immediately there's this desire to escape that little bit of discomfort. And usually that happens, you already know the answer, through the phone. We take out our phone because we want a momentary escape from that just a little bit of discomfort of being in the elevator. So often we're in situations or around people that we don't like, but another form of ordinary dukkha is being separated from loved ones and pleasant situations. So this can be through death, divorce, breakups, friendship breakups, um, traveling, moving away, anytime we're separated from ones we love. That's a form of ordinary dukkha. Sometimes the separation is from a pleasant situation. When I ask my students to come up with their own example for this one, they usually say the pleasant situation is their bed in the morning, and then the separation is leaving the bed in the morning. That there's this desire to stay in the pleasant situation and a kind of mild discomfort or suffering of leaving that situation. Finally, in ordinary dukkha, all forms of physical and mental suffering are included. So this includes all types of body aches, toothaches, headaches, are all physical suffering, but also includes mental suffering such as grief, depression, sadness, anxiety, panic. These are all types of ordinary suffering. The second aspect, the second way of looking at this concept of dukkha is dukkha that is produced by change. It's a second aspect because it's not really different than the first. So an example of dukkha produced by change could be a change in relationship status, or what we called a minute ago, a breakup. So you go from being in a relationship to single, and that change in state causes suffering. Now, each one simply is what it is, but we suffer because we are attached to that prior state, and maybe not even to the state itself, but simply to the idea of it. So if you think about attachment in terms of the attachment to an idea of something, you could think about the example of traffic in Atlanta. A lot of people suffer when there's traffic, myself included, and it's because we have an idea of a state without traffic, a commute that only takes 30 minutes. There's a change in that when there's, let's say, an accident. Now there is traffic. Now my commute is much longer, and I suffer. But I suffer because I'm attached to the idea of a commute without traffic. So produced by change could also be something as simple as happens 5 times a day here, which is the weather changes. It goes from sunny and 70, which actually happened today, to rainy and cold. We could just say, oh, now it's raining, and that's what it's like right now. But instead we say, I wish it was still 70. I wish it was still sunny out, like it was earlier. So this brings us to the second noble truth, which is the source for the arising of dukkha. In Buddhism, there's no ultimate source. So the source or the cause is just the most immediate, most palpable, most immediately felt source. And the word for this, there's many words, but one is thirst, another is craving, attachment, clinging, desire, and a stronger form of desire would be greed. So we suffer in the example of it being sunny. It was sunny and 70, but now it's cold and rainy because I'm attached to that idea of that weather. Or often we're attached to a person, or it could even be a tangible thing like a phone. I'm attached to my phone, and therefore when my phone falls, I feel suffering, I feel pain, because I'm attached to that thing, and now that thing is no longer there. So the second noble truth, the source or the cause of suffering, is our attachment, our clinging, our desire, our thirst. And often this attachment can be very physical. It can be an attachment to something material, such as a phone or a food or a person. But often it's an idea that we have of a state that we wish it was. I'm attached to the idea of my commute without traffic. I'm attached to an idea of how the weather should be. I'm attached to an idea of how my friend ought to behave. I'm attached to an idea of myself and what that self looks like and has accomplished and has done. And so we suffer because of this attachment. The third noble truth, which we'll talk about next, is really in order to no longer suffer, that would mean to let go of thirst. And to let go of thirst isn't necessarily to push thirst away, but rather simply to accept things as they are. And this is something that must be practiced. So the invitation in this unit is not simply to listen to the lectures and do the readings, but actually to practice meditation, to practice this letting go in a moment to moment, breath by breath, embodied practice of meditating in any posture, which can be expanded to any activity that you do in your life.